Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Shadow of the Erdtree. Today though marks the last of the stat type tier list for our current patch of 12.3, the current version of everything. We end it with the faith type, which has been a funny one to do because compared to other stat types that say have around 15 good options or best options, faith has this pile of decent picks that could be discussed in this video. It's been very hard to pick just 15. With that in mind, I will reference a bunch of other extra considerations during this video just to acknowledge more, but we do have our top 15 picks for faith there, ranked against each other as best as we can. This means if the weapon is brought up today, it's a fantastic faith weapon, even if it's say C tier compared to a busted pick in a higher tier. Once again though, be aware that this is a PvE list, and as you can see we have S+, all the way down to C tier this time, so let's just begin. And as usual, we'll start from the bottom in C tier. First up then, we have a classic weapon, the Sacred Relic Sword. What you have here is a reasonable physical damage greatsword with a mix of holy, and obviously the standout aspect of this is the massive arc Ash of War. Classically known for its rune farming potential with the range and spread of that attack, it's extremely likely you'll have it land every time you use it, and you even get a little bit of protection during the cast to help get it through. The downside is that it's very expensive on FP and stamina, but obviously it's worth it, and that Ash scales pretty much just with faith, so you need to level faith to make that Ash reasonably strong, but the actual weapon is dex. But as a greatsword with okay stats, it's solid but not insane. So while it's very solid, nothing about it currently screams busted super strong to me, just a very good faith pick. Similar to a new weapon in the DLC, the next weapon we're talking about is the Black Steel Greathammer, which I do really like, but you gotta acknowledge its limits. For this one, it is indeed a Black Steel type. That's a new lineup of weapons in the DLC, which all come with this cool passive. Starting with physical and holy, and if you enhance the holy by making it sacred or something like that, it gets extra effect from that. As a weapon then, you've got a reasonably hard-hitting physical holy hammer, leading to easy stagger build-up and a very standard hammer moveset. Playing around breaking poise and punishing that is a very reasonable way to play this. But ideally, you'll use this weapon for guard countering, where you block and then use a heavy attack after taking a hit. That's because it comes with a unique guard counter attack that causes this holy burst out of the ground. If you combine that with a new deflecting tier in your wondrous physic, you can block right before you're about to get hit, ignore the hit even though you're two-handing a hammer rather than a shield, and then smash them with a juiced up guard counter. That's kind of the playstyle you're using with this, building up a lot of stagger and guard countering to victory. The DPS is not ultra high, but it is a very easy and fun, quite unique playstyle. So I really like it, so that's why it's C tier. Also in C tier, we have both the Sword of Light and Darkness, two new straight swords in the DLC, which as weapons are not that good. For some reason, they made the scaling super bad on these, so they're not that good to use directly, but the reason they're here is their Ashes of War, which cannot be denied. The Sword of Light gives you a body buff, increasing the holy damage you deal, where the Sword of Darkness debuffs enemies, making them take more holy damage. So with a different weapon that is a holy weapon, or incantations focused on holy, you buff yourself up, debuff the enemy, and spam something better that's based on holy. If we're really to cut this down to the truth of it, I think just using the Sword of Light on any reasonable holy build to body buff yourself, then swap off, even completely unequip the weapon, is a very valuable way to play, and maybe even meta for most holy builds, because why not take that buff? But they are very relevant for any holy build for the buffs. Moving on, we now have the Halo Scythe Reaper. This one's weird. Obviously, the Ash of War is super strong. You send out this delayed holy arc and you can spam it to send out loads back to back to back. And it can be done from close range for like shotgun blast or from really far away. What holds it back is pretty much the melee weapon itself. The scaling's not incredible on it, and the Ash is entirely holy based, so you want to scale that through faith. So I think it works best in a faith focused build where you're using the Ash for the heavy hits and DPS around other incantations for versatility. The weapon is basically just a useful tool to save FP when needed, but you won't be using the weapon as a primary source of damage. So while the Ash obviously kicks butt, the rest of the weapon is just okay. So that brings it down to C tier for me. Lastly, for C tier for official rankings, I'm going with the Erdteel dagger, which is one of the original daggers, but it's just funny, surprisingly so, how good of a weapon this is as a faith option for a dagger. Basically what you want to do is scale it with a flame R, using whatever relevant flame buff Ash to do that, such as Flaming Strike that you see me use here in this footage. But there's new ones in the DLC which will do much the same. In any case, you've got this surprisingly high mix of physical and fire, seemingly like that recent Smith script weapon bug where you have all the normal physical on top of the affinity you go with after that, meaning it's hitting harder than maybe it should be. heavy. What you're seeing is literally a dagger being two-handed, and look at the damage here. Shockingly good. Then if you run 2 of them in power stance, something like that, you can get some serious successive hits going, or work in some proper ash options for utility. With very high faith then, you're able to easily run this weapon or weapons together, and then just use great incantations around that. You're not running any strength or dex for this. So weirdly effective for a fully faith build if you're looking to do high level incants and then want a really good weapon to rely on around that. Definitely deserving a highlight. Now, I did mention there's a bunch of other weapons I could put into C tier, but I'm only picking 15 for today. So I want to reference a couple things, like the Madding Hand. Obviously, if you're running the ultra madness-based buffs before going ham on any faith build, then you're going to be running the new Madding Hand, which gives you extra AR after you proc madness. That is a very, very meta thing to do at this point. So Madding Hand deserves at least an acknowledgement, even if you're never really using the weapon itself directly. There are other classic faith picks that are doing really well, like Golden Order Greatsword or the Magma Whip Candlestick, and new options like the Greatsword of Damnation or the Shadow Sunflower Blossom or the Serpent Flail, for example. Even though people don't like flails, it is pretty decent. There is so many good, probably about C tier picks that we could go for. These are the ones I wanted to talk about directly. So let's now move up to B tier, starting with the Coded Sword Straight Swords. I love these. Pure holy weapons. Ideal for an 80 faith build, running 2 of these in power stance and then relying on the massive Ash of War, which was buffed quite a while back to be a lot faster. It's a really reliable option now. This is the literal king of holy damage for high DPS and even burst, in my opinion. Anything that's weak specifically to holy, this is going to kill it faster than anything. So let's say you're power stancing them, you can just rely on successive hit build up and a build around that, and that's it. And do incredibly. Or you could super commit to the Ash of War, which has incredible range and a seriously big hit behind it. And unlike, say, the Sacred Relic Swords Ash, this is a lot quicker and safer to use. And then, of course, you can use both of those things easy together. Successive hits and the Ash whenever necessary. It is super effective, and yet only B tier. That's because it's held back by the complete lack of any physical damage. And if you come across a holy resistant enemy, that's a major problem. But it's not a deal breaker. You should be running high faith, of course, in this setup, so you can run other incant options for other damage types, fire or whatever, when you need to. But obviously as a weapon, having no physical will be a problem. Next up in B tier, our first colossal sword of the list, we have the Malikeths Black Blade, the classic Ash of War that provides destined death, reducing the enemy's max health, and interestingly, that effect can stack with, say, the Black Knife Ash of War version, so obviously those two are going to be great in combination, but we're reviewing this weapon specifically, so we're not going to acknowledge that. What we can acknowledge is that it's technically easier or better to run this weapon with a new two-handed sword talisman that's a 15% increased damage while two-handing. That easily fits into the classic meta build with this weapon. Then you're pretty much just enjoying a colossal sword, hard hitting with a lot of stagger build-up potential, and an Ash of War that's a 3-parter. The spin, the slam down, and then the explosion with destined death. I really enjoy the higher poise during the Ash, which really helps it get off, and the range of the explosion can help even mobile enemies still get hit. Big downside to this weapon though, compared to the other colossal swords we're going to talk about, is that it's really heavy. 22 weight is ridiculous. And in general, the moveset's going to be slower than your other colossal swords on this list. Really, it just shines the best when you're using the Black Knife combo. And again, that's not exactly this weapon. So it deserves an acknowledgement. It's a solid pick still, but it has problems, that's for sure. Next up in B tier, we have Siluria's Tree, the Great Spear. I love this one for a lot of reasons, but it obviously has downsides too. Again, just like the Malikeths Black Blade and a lot of weapons on this list, if you're two-handing a weapon, we now have that 15% increase in damage to the DLC, thanks to the two-handed sword talisman. Of course, this weapon is a mix of physical and holy then, very buffable in different ways, and its Ash of War is a chargeable heavy, which means the Godfrey icon talisman will work for it, making it an ultra hard-hitting, ranged Ash of War punish. Fantastic for even smaller punish windows in this DLC because you can use it from medium to long range. The short version of this Ash though is terrible. It's a tiny downward slam in front of you. It's nowhere near as good. The hitbox is tiny. So you're mostly using the Ash for full charge, which will take time. If you're fighting an enemy up close, like an agile boss, that can be a problem to find the right timing for that, so you have to make use of the range and back up. The base weapon and moveset itself is fine. Great Spear isn't my favorite, or many people's in general. You know, less stagger potential than your colossal weapons by comparison for a slower big weapon. But to have a different kind of heavy-hitting holy weapon, this is obviously a great pick. If you like Great Spears and you want a holy build, this is going to be hard to to beat. Finally, for the B tier though, we do have another boss weapon. It's the Maracas hammer, which when two-handed is probably working the best because back in 1.09, they increased the poise damage of hammers when two-handing them. That means, of course, we're going to use the new two-handed sword talisman. It does have the classic slam down explosion, Ash of War, which absolutely carries this weapon. That's ultra hard hitting and super high on the stagger build up. Humanoids can even be sent flying into the air with this. Also great AoE. Between this hammer and the Ash then, you're able to do these really quick charged heavies for brilliant stagger build up, super easy to play and use. And then you go for the Ash whenever you can, ideally hitting with the hammer and the holy explosion by aiming and timing it well. This is going to be best used as part of a strength faith build though, providing some good space for suitable incantations. So I think it's quite versatile with that in mind, and again, very easy to play. Alright, that brings us up to A tier, where we come to less weapons in a tier, starting of course with a new weapon, the Fire Knight's Greatsword, which I absolutely love. You want to run this with one of the new flame arts though, specifically the Fire Knight arts. And personally, I love the thrusting spear one, Flame Spear. The point of this is much like the black steel weapons, you enhance the damage by adding fire, buffing it up with fire, making it a fire scaling weapon. Outside of that, you've just got a physical fire colossal sword with a more vertical moveset we previously saw with the Godslayer's Greatsword. Something about that, it just feels faster and easier to use, more reliable, and it's still a colossal sword with that in mind, so a huge stagger build up, whether that's the light combos that are super quick or the big heavy hitting charge attacks. The reach is really good, especially when we consider the new Ashes of War like Flame Spear, where we poke forward, buffing up the weapon in fire from seriously far away, building up great stagger as well. That is such an effective punish that you could just rely on that Ash to kill enemies or bosses with, outside of the really good base weapon itself. There's nothing crazy about it per se, but everything is so consistent, from the damage, the stagger, the range, and how potent the different Ash options you have actually are, and how you can work in loads of flame incantations if you want. I really like this weapon. It's a great new addition in the DLC. Not new in the DLC though, by comparison, is the Godslayer's Greatsword, which is the alternative version of this essentially. Obviously it's slightly better since the DLC because we have that new two-handed sword talisman, and in 12.2 there was a slight change to it. Apparently they fixed a bug with the Ash of War where it wasn't applying poise while using the skill, so you're more protected during it, I guess. In any case, it's a great alternative to your Fire Knight's Greatsword, as they are super similar weapons with almost the same moveset and the same kind of range and playstyle. This one by comparison isn't strength based, it's dex based, but the Ash is obviously Black Flame. This deals percent damage over time, so the bigger health bar you're actually attacking with this, the more damage you get. This Ash hits really hard, doing a quick wind up that has a small tick of damage during that, and then you can follow it with a big 2-hit combo with some good range behind it. Those hit very hard with big stagger potential behind them, but you will be vulnerable during, of course. I find this harder for sure than say your Fire Knight's Greatsword Ash options to actually fully land, especially against some of these DLC bosses, but with the great range it has, it is very doable and the damage is worth it. The Fire Knight's Greatsword and the Godslayer Greatsword are so similar. Either is going to be a top tier pick though, I really like them. Last for A tier then, we have the new Death Knight's Long-Haft Axe. This is great, it's like the Crescent Axe but better. A mix of physical and lightning that's super buffable, and then with its moveset, you've got a really fast 4-hit light attack combo that I love, or the more horizontal heavy attack swings. Baseline, just buffing up lightning and physical, and using those light and heavy attacks, you're going to do great with this. But what pushes it into A tier from say B tier is the Ash of War, which as you explode in lightning, dash forward in iframes, leaping up and slamming down with even more physical and lightning behind it. The fact that you have a slower, heavy hitting weapon with an iframe gap closing dodge is nuts. So using the Ash to dodge an attack opens up new potential for punish windows with this weapon specifically. And it's still got great stagger potential behind it and raw damage with the mix of lightning. So it's very simple to play and very effective. I'm just a huge fan of it and I think it's a great addition to the game. And now we move up to S tier though, starting with the old weapon of Magma Blade, a curved sword. Naturally then you want to run 2 of these in power stance if you can. And this is a very exciting time for Magma based weapons because there's a new talisman, the Talisman of Dread, which increases Ashes of War for those types of weapons by 14%, which is only 1% less than say the Shard of Alexander. So if you're wanting to spam Ashes of War as a main source of damage with this weapon, this works in so well. Obviously that's got an issue though, because as a curved sword, you got really good successive hits, running attacks, standing combo, jump attacks. Your common talisman slots are going to work in those 2 successive hit talismans, and then you've got like your Fire Scorpion and then Alexander's, so having a 5th slot would be amazing. But with this weapon in particular, it's not beneficial benefiting from dex, right? It's benefiting from strength. So dropping millicents and slapping in the new Talisman of Dread and then leaning more into the Ash of War with this massive boost we're getting from that, it's actually incredible. So the power stance combos are actually taking a back burner with how good the Ash becomes with that new talisman. So it's only better than it was, and I think it's pushed it into S tier for sure. Give it a try if you haven't. On that note, there's one other weapon in S tier, and that's the Magma Worm's Scalesword. For similar reasons, it's even better than ever before. You've got the new Talisman of Dread we just talked about, which as a magma weapon will increase the Ash of War by 14%. On top of that, there's still the new two-handed sword talisman in the DLC. That's another 15% to your two-handed attacks. It's a pretty big deal. Suddenly this weapon becomes incredibly hard-hitting when it was already hard-hitting before. What's cool about it too, if you don't know, is it has unique heavies, a kind of guillotine slam, also working on a jump attack. Or the Ash of War is a super guillotine slam, leaving behind magma after you use it. So use the jump attacks for smaller windows, building up stagger and nice hits, charge heavies when you can, or ideally spam the Ash of War into the target, dealing unbelievable damage. Between the Magma Blade and the Scale Sword, I actually think the Scale Sword's probably the stronger of the two right now. So strongly recommend that one too. But lastly, we do have the S plus tier, and there's only one weapon there. Of course, it's the Blasphemous Blade, which technically is better in this DLC for the same reasons. You have the two-handed sword talisman if you're doing that, but also, amazingly, the new Talisman of the Dread that increases magma damage. It works for this Ash of War, which is fully fire, remember. So the Blasphemous Blade is only better in this DLC, even though in that patch in the lead up to the DLC, was it 12.2, technically removed the poison knockdown potential of the Ash of War specifically, but that doesn't matter. You get 10% of your max life heal every time you use the Ash. You get health back whenever you land a killing blow. It deals more damage than ever with the new talisman options in the DLC. It's just so reliable and so easy to use, and it works in so many different setups. This is the weapon I use to beat all of the DLC as quickly and easy as possible for video purposes. It's still absolutely S+, and arguably, despite the poise stuff, even better because of the higher DPS. And so you could very well argue it's the best weapon in the game. But yeah, there you have it. That's our initial faith tier list for the current patch. So I hope this was useful to hear and see for your own considerations. If it's helped you, please do drop a like, put a lot of work into it. If there's any weapons you think we could have mentioned or included, let us know in the comments. But we'll be back again in the future when there's new updates and balance patches and so on that we are expecting very soon. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.